What would you do if the man you loved more than life itself watched you bleed out, losing your 8-month-old unborn child, and only sent you $100? This is the brutal, heartbreaking true story of Nora and Major Adrian Hayes, a love story that burned bright, then turned ice cold, destroyed by pride, suspicion, and a single $50,000 surgery deposit that rewrote their entire future. While Nora lay dying on a hospital floor, begging for her husband to save their baby, Adrian stood under glittering chandeliers at a lavish military gala, smiling beside another woman who'd spent years poisoning his mind, and when he finally turned his phone back on hours later, the news shattered him completely. Nothing would ever fix the cruel mistake he made that night. It all started the night before their wedding, a night that should have been full of hope and happy anticipation turned into the irreversible end of Nora and Adrian's once perfect love. Nora's mother was rushed into emergency care, needing an urgent $50,000 surgery deposit to survive. Desperate and terrified, Nora ran straight to her fiancé, the man who'd sworn to love and protect her through every storm, begging him to just listen to her plea before it was too late. But Adrian didn't hear a terrified girlfriend begging for her mother's life. All he saw was a 5-figure number on a hospital bill, and every toxic lie his family and his manipulative friend Madeline had ever whispered about Nora came crashing to the surface. He paid the $50,000 deposit that night, saving Nora's mother's life temporarily, but he broke every piece of their love in the process. That single payment wasn't an act of kindness to him. It was proof that Nora was the greedy gold digger everyone had warned him about, the woman who only loved him for his military rank and his money. From that night forward, every single time Nora dared to ask him for anything, no matter how desperate her situation, his answer never changed. $100, cold, clinical, demeaning. When she was in a brutal car accident, and could barely move, he sent $100. When she begged him to attend her mother's funeral, to stand with her in her darkest grief, he sent $100. Every small cruel payment was a silent insult, a constant reminder of what he thought she was. 8 months ago, Nora discovered she was pregnant. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that things could change, that their unborn child would mend the fractured trust between them, that Adrian would finally see her not as a liar or a gold digger, but as his wife and the mother of his baby. She poured her heart out into 77 voice messages, trembling with joy and fear, desperate to tell him they were going to have a child, but Adrian never listened to a single one. He never heard her shaky, hopeful tone, never heard the love in her voice. Instead, he sent 77 separate payments of $100, one for every message she'd sent. Each transaction was a brutal rejection, a cold dismissal of her hope, her love, and their unborn child. And when Nora's pregnancy took a terrifying turn, when she started bleeding heavily, and was rushed into emergency surgery fighting to save their baby, he sent another $100, all while Madeline's Instagram stories flooded social media, showing Adrian in his crisp formal dress uniform, posing intimately with her at a glamorous officers' charity gala. The entire military community gushed in the comments, calling them the perfect well-matched power couple. Nora stared at those photos until her fingers went numb, lying helpless in a hospital emergency room, begging her husband to save their dying child, while he danced and smiled with another woman like she was already his perfect future wife. By the time Adrian finally bothered to turn his dead phone back on at the end of the night, his terrified staff officer could only deliver the unthinkable news that would haunt him forever. His wife and his baby hadn't made it, and in that devastating moment, the cold, unyielding Major Adrian Hayes completely lost his mind. It was a quiet prenatal checkup that first cracked open the fragile, dangerous calm of Nora's miserable married life. The doctor slid her medical report across the cold exam table, her expression serious and urgent as she addressed Nora directly. Nora was nearly 8 months pregnant with a high-risk pregnancy, with a severe risk of premature labor. The doctor strongly recommended immediate hospital admission for round-the-clock observation, warning that her condition could worsen at any second, and require an emergency section to save her and the baby's life. Glancing down at the empty emergency contact section on the admission form, the doctor asked where Nora's husband was. The question didn't even sting anymore. For every single doctor's appointment, every blood test, every ultrasound, every fetal monitoring session, every medical payment and prescription refill, Nora had been completely alone. For months, she'd navigated every high-risk detail of her pregnancy by herself. The hospital nurses had long stopped asking why no one ever accompanied her. They'd already learned the cruel truth that Nora Hayes was a married woman with no husband at all. With shaking hands, Nora pulled out her phone and recorded a soft, desperate voice message to Adrian, hoping against all odds that he'd finally care. "The doctor says the baby might come early," she told him quietly. "Can you please come to the hospital?" She waited for a reply, for a call, for any sign of concern from the man she'd married, but only a single notification popped up on her screen a minute later. "A transfer. Adrian Hayes sent you $100. The short, cutting note attached to the payment sliced through her heart like a knife. Need money again. Staring blankly at those cold words, Nora's mind drifted back to the night that destroyed everything, the night before their wedding, the night of her mother's emergency surgery. She could still remember the way Adrian used to look at her, like she was the entire center of his world. Long before he became the cold, unyielding Major Hayes, long before military briefings and strict uniform protocols hardened every soft line of his face, he'd been a young, passionate 22-year-old officer who'd loved her fiercely enough to fight his entire family for their relationship. He'd saved every penny of his meager training pay to buy her a tiny simple engagement ring. He'd worked endless night shifts just to afford the deposit on their first small apartment together. He'd once driven halfway across the entire city, exhausted after a grueling field exercise, just to leave a cup of hot coffee outside her dorm door, knowing she'd been up studying all night. When he proposed to her, his eyes had been bright and full of promise, vowing that he'd make her the happiest officer's wife in the entire military community. Back then, Nora had believed every single word. She'd thought she was marrying a man who would love her, protect her, and stand by her side through every hardship life threw their way. She never could have imagined that one medical bill would turn all that love into unshakable hatred and suspicion. She'd shown up at his apartment that night, crumpled hospital bill clutched in her trembling hand, terrified and desperate. She hadn't even gotten halfway through her explanation about her mother's urgent emergency surgery before Adrian's eyes locked onto the $50,000 number printed on the paper. He didn't ask questions, he didn't let her explain the life or death situation, he didn't comfort her, or hold her while she panicked. All he felt was betrayal. So they were right, he'd said coldly, his voice distant and cruel. My parents said you only chased me for money. Madeline said you'd beg me for cash sooner or later. I didn't believe them until you showed up with a $50,000 bill the night before our wedding. He'd stared at the paper like it was something dirty and repulsive, like Nora and her family were nothing but greedy leeches, trying to drain his military salary. Nora had tried frantically to explain, to tell him it was a life or death emergency for her mother, that she had nowhere else to turn, but he'd already looked at her like a complete stranger, all the love in his eyes erased in an instant. Did you really think I couldn't walk away now that the wedding is tomorrow? He'd snapped before walking out of his own apartment, and leaving her alone, sobbing and desperate, with no way to save her mother. Left with no other options, Nora had accepted Madeline's seemingly kind suggestion to seek help from a military family donor at the Meridian Hotel. It was a decision she'd regret for the rest of her life. The donor, Harlan Price, had grabbed her wrist aggressively in the hotel lounge, trying to drag her toward the elevators. Adrian had arrived mid-confrontation, but he hadn't come to save her or ask what was really happening. He'd only seen her alone with a strange man in a luxury hotel, and every terrible accusation Madeline and his family had made solidified in his mind. An hour later, the hospital called to tell Nora the surgery deposit had been paid in full from Adrian's account. She'd thought that meant he'd finally listened, that things could go back to normal between them. She was wrong. That payment was never an act of love, it was permanent proof, etched into his mind forever. That she was nothing more than a greedy liar. The money saved her mother's life for a little while, but it couldn't save her mother in the end, and it completely destroyed Nora's marriage, her reputation, and her future. When her mother passed away not long after that emergency surgery, Nora crumbled. She called Adrian over and over again, begging him to come to the funeral, to be her support in her worst grief, to hold her while she buried her only family. He never answered a single call. Hours after the funeral ended, he sent his usual cold response, $100. After that day, the cruel labels stuck to Nora like tar: barracks gold digger, officer hunter, the woman who married a military major just for his paycheck. Adrian's fellow officers joked about her relentlessly, tearing her down at every base event, and Adrian never once corrected them. Sometimes, when he was angry at her, he even smiled at the cruel jokes, silently agreeing with every harsh word. They remained legally married, trapped in a cold, loveless marriage, but they were total strangers in every way that mattered. He never spoke a single word to her in reply to her messages ever again. Every plea, every cry for help, every vulnerable message was only ever met with a $100 transfer, a cold, dehumanizing insult that reminded her exactly how little he thought of her. The strangest, most painful part of it all, he never filed for divorce. He never let her leave, he just kept her trapped in this endless cycle of humiliation and loneliness, punishing her every single day for a lie he'd never bothered to disprove. A kind maternity nurse noticed Nora's quiet devastation, as she stood frozen at the hospital payment desk, staring at Adrian's cruel money transfer. She'd seen countless young pregnant women break under the weight of loneliness and heartbreak, and she spoke to Nora with gentle compassion. If you can't get admitted today, go straight home and monitor yourself closely, she instructed softly. You're almost 8 months pregnant. If you experience bleeding, abdominal pain, regular contractions, or any reduced fetal movement, do not wait a single second. Go straight to the emergency room immediately. She handed Nora a small paper bag of emergency medication to help stabilize her dangerous contractions, her tone firm but kind. "This can buy you a little time, but it's no replacement for professional hospital observation. Promise me you'll be careful." Nora nodded numbly, thanking the nurse quietly, before folding the discharge instructions into her bag and walking out of the hospital. One hand was clamped tightly over her swollen belly, protecting the tiny fragile life growing inside her, while the other hung limply at her side. The sky was starting to dim, and the weight of her loneliness settled over her, like a heavy blanket. She was carrying a child, married to a high-ranking military officer, and she was completely utterly alone. After stepping onto the hospital curb, Nora stared at her phone for a long moment before dialing Adrian's number. She'd already braced herself for him not to answer. She'd grown used to the endless silence and rejection. Ever since her mother's funeral, he almost never picked up her calls, especially not when she reached out with any kind of trouble or need. On the rare occasions he did answer, he'd demand a dollar amount up front, then end the call and send his demeaning $100 payment. But this time, the call connected after just one single ring. "What is it?" Adrian's voice was sharp, impatient, and distant. In the background, Nora could hear loud chatter and the sound of a band tuning musical instruments, clear signs he was at some fancy crowded event, surrounded by people and laughter. Nora tightened her grip on the paper medication bag in her hand, her throat tight with suppressed tears. "I just left the hospital," she said quietly, forcing her voice to stay steady. "The doctor told me to go home and monitor my symptoms closely. You don't need to come here, and you don't need to send me any money. I just wanted you to know." For a split second, the line went completely silent. Nora dared to hope he might finally understand, that he might finally feel a flicker of concern for her and their baby. But then Madeline's sweet, poisonous voice cut through the phone line, dripping with fake concern and hidden malice. "I told you she'd change her story," Madeline purred. "A minute ago, she was panicking about the baby being in danger. Now suddenly she doesn't need you at all. Adrian, she only did that to make you panic and rush to her side. She's just manipulating you again." Before Nora could defend herself, Madeline kept going, twisting every word Nora had ever said to fuel Adrian's hatred. "Wasn't the baby perfectly healthy at her last checkup? How does it suddenly turn into a life-threatening emergency the second she thinks she can get money out of you? If I hadn't stopped you, you would have wasted more cash on her lies tonight." Nora's fingers squeezed so tight around the paper bag that her knuckles turned white. Her chest ached with helpless desperation. "Adrian, I'm not lying," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "I'm just telling you exactly what the doctor told me. I didn't ask for money at all." "Enough." Adrian's voice turned ice cold, sharp with unbridled anger and disgust. "I almost fell for your lies again." "Nora, I didn't ask for any money," she repeated, broken and desperate. "You never say you're asking for money out loud," he snapped back, his tone ruthless and unforgiving. "This is low, even for you, using our unborn baby as an excuse to manipulate me and get cash. How could you stoop this low?" Nora stood frozen on the hospital curb for what felt like hours, the cold evening wind biting at her skin, tears burning hot in her eyes. By the time she dragged herself back to the empty military base housing, where she lived alone, the sky had turned pitch black. The second she stepped through the front door, her phone vibrated with a new notification. Another $100 transfer from Adrian Hayes. The note underneath destroyed every last bit of hope she had left. "I'm ashamed our child has a liar for a mother." Tears spilled down her cheeks uncontrollably, no longer held back by sheer willpower. She stumbled to the dining table, where an old framed photo of her and Adrian still sat collecting dust. In the picture, Adrian had just finished his officer training, young and bright-eyed, no cold hardness in his smile, no cruelty in his gaze. His arm was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, his eyes full of pride and love, like she was the greatest achievement he'd ever earned. Back then, he hadn't been the cold, unfeeling Major Hayes to the world. He'd just been Adrian, her Adrian, the man who'd fought his entire family to marry her, who'd gotten disowned and still worked 3 grueling jobs just to buy her a ring, the man who'd knelt down and promised her the happiest life possible, who'd sworn to protect her forever. All of that perfect, genuine love had died the night she'd asked him for help saving her mother. After that night, he was no longer her lover, her protector, or her best friend. In his eyes, she was nothing but a greedy gold digger, a compulsive liar, the biggest mistake he'd ever made in his life. With a heart heavy enough to break, Nora flipped the photo face down on the table, hiding the happy memories that only hurt worse now. She set her emergency medication on the nightstand and sat carefully on the edge of her bed, one hand resting gently on her swollen belly, feeling the faint, precious movement of her baby inside her. "Just hold on a little longer, my sweet baby," she whispered brokenly. "We just need to hold on a little longer." Outside her window, car lights flickered past on the distant road, and warm lights turned on in every neighboring house, each one a reminder of happy, loving families coming home to each other. Every house on the base was full of warmth and connection, except hers. In this empty, quiet house, there was no one waiting for her, no one to care if she hurt, no one to save her or their baby. She was completely alone, and the worst was still yet to come. That night, just after Nora changed into her soft pajamas and lay down to rest, hoping her body would stabilize and her baby would be safe, her phone rang sharply. It was Adrian. She hesitated before answering, already knowing his call would bring nothing but pain. Family readiness reception tonight. You're coming. His tone was flat, commanding, and non-negotiable, no room for argument. Nora leaned back against the headboard, her body heavy with exhaustion and the fear of worsening pregnancy complications. The life-saving medication still sat untouched on her nightstand. I don't feel well at all, she told him honestly. The doctor ordered me to stay home and monitor my condition. I can't go to a public event tonight. You were discharged from the hospital, weren't you? Adrian cut her off dismissively, completely ignoring her very real medical risks. Command has asked me multiple times why my wife never shows up to base family events. Just come, sign in, stand there for 20 minutes. Then go home. It's not hard, Adrian. I seriously can't stop using the hospital as a pathetic excuse, he snapped, his voice laced with pure irritation. You've embarrassed me enough with your money scandals. Don't make me answer more questions about you tonight. Don't humiliate me further. The call ended abruptly, leaving Nora staring at her blank phone screen in shock and agony. For a long time she sat frozen on her bed, torn between her failing body and her terror of making Adrian angrier than he already was. Finally, she forced herself to stand, pulled on a loose, comfortable coat to hide her pregnant belly, and called a cab to take her to the base reception. She knew she'd regret it, but she had no fight left to argue with him anymore. The reception was held in a bright, sterile low building near the base parade ground, flooded with harsh overhead lights. Groups of uniformed officers and their polished put-together spouses stood in tight little circles, laughing and chatting casually, enjoying the formal event. Nora could still remember the early days of her marriage, when Adrian would drag her around every single one of these events, his hand never leaving hers, proudly introducing her to every single person he met. "This is my wife Nora," he'd say with a bright, loving smile, like he wanted the entire world to know she was his and his alone. Now, her only purpose at these events was to sign her name on a sheet of paper and leave as quickly as possible. No smiles, no introductions, no love, just obligation and humiliation. Madeline was standing behind the check-in table, a volunteer badge pinned neatly to her elegant evening gown, handing out name tags to arriving guests. The second she spotted Nora walking through the door, she turned to Adrian with a triumphant, smug smile, her voice loud enough for nearby people to hear clearly. "See, I told you she was fine. She made it here perfectly well. I told you not to rush and send her any hospital deposit money earlier. She was just faking everything for attention and cash." Adrian walked straight over to Nora, completely ignoring her pale face and exhausted, unwell demeanor. He held out a pen toward her, his expression cold and unyielding. "Sign in." Nora's hands trembled as she took the pen. Before she could write her name, Madeline leaned in, her voice sickly sweet and fake, feigning gentle concern as she stared pointedly at Nora's pregnant belly. "Nora, $3,800, isn't even a real hospital admission deposit," she purred. "It sounds like a random number you made up on the spot. Next time you're going to use your unborn baby to beg for money, at least check the hospital rates first so you don't get caught lying." A handful of nearby officers' wives snickered openly at her words, their laughter sharp and cruel. The whispers started immediately, cutting through Nora's already broken heart. "Wow, the baby's not even born yet, and she's already turning her husband into her personal ATM. What do you expect? Girls who don't come from money learn how to manipulate rich military men fast." Nora's palm turned slick with cold sweat around the pen, her vision blurring with tears. She'd never felt more humiliated and alone in her entire life. "I would never use my child for money," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet laughter and whispers. Adrian's face darkened with unbridled disgust, and he spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, publicly condemning his pregnant wife in front of the entire base community. "Then stop putting our child on every single bill you fabricate. Nora, stop dragging his name into your greedy lies." Madeline lowered her voice even more, her words sharp and venomous, designed to break Nora completely. "Nora, stop lying. What kind of example are you setting for your unborn child? What will he think of you when he grows up and finds out his own mother used him for money?" Every word stabbed into Nora's chest like a tiny sharp needle, piercing the last of her dignity and hope. "Finish signing and leave." Adrian ordered coldly. "I don't want the entire military base knowing my own wife lies and manipulates people, even using her unborn baby for profit." Every single explanation Nora had left died in her throat. There was no point in fighting, no point in defending herself. No one would believe her. No one cared about the truth. With shaking hands, she scrawled her signature on the sign in sheet, dropped the pen on the table, and turned to walk away before Adrian could dismiss her like a disobedient stranger. The night wind outside was sharp and icy, cutting straight through her thin coat, She'd only made it halfway across the concrete walkway, desperate to get away from the crowd and the humiliation, when a brutal, tearing pain slammed into her lower abdomen, so intense it doubled her over. It felt like something vital inside her body had torn completely open. She grabbed tightly onto the metal railing to hold herself up, and a second later, she felt warm, wet liquid spreading rapidly down her legs. Dark red blood soaked straight through her pants, visible even in the dim night light. Her hands began shaking violently, panic exploding in her chest. She'd taken the emergency medication exactly as the doctor ordered. She'd rested. She'd followed every single instruction. Why was this happening? Why was she bleeding? Through blurred, tear-filled eyes, she fumbled for her phone and typed out a desperate text to Adrian. "I'm bleeding badly, I need to go to the ER right now. Please come." She called him immediately after, praying he'd finally see the truth, finally save her and their baby. He answered on the fourth ring, but his voice held zero concern, only pure, unbridled fury and suspicion. "Nora, I'm warning you one last time, stop faking emergencies and using our baby to lie to me for money." "I'm not faking it," she gasped out, her body trembling with pain and fear. "I'm really bleeding, I can't stand up anymore, please believe me, your due date isn't for another month," he said coldly, completely unmoved by her desperate plea. "When the time comes, I'll pay for every single delivery expense, even a VIP private hospital room for you. Until then, stop acting like a greedy gold digger and making up fake emergencies to beg for cash." "I'm not asking for money," she sobbed, her strength fading fast. "I just need you to." Her legs gave out completely. She crumpled to the cold concrete ground, her phone slipping out of her weak, shaking hand. She stretched out her fingers, trying desperately to grab it, to beg him one more time, but she had no strength left. In the distance, party guests heard her fall and rushed over, their voices filled with shock and terror. "Oh my God, look at her, she's pregnant and bleeding heavily, call an ambulance right now." Through the phone speaker, Adrian finally heard the distant chaos, and his voice shifted for the first time all night, sharp and alert. "Nora, where are you? What's happening?" But before Nora could reply, Madeline's voice cut in again, smooth and calculating, destroying every last chance of Adrian believing her. "Don't fall for her act again, Adrian. My hospital friend just sent me her latest checkup report. The baby's heartbeat was completely stable earlier today. She's not half as hurt as she's pretending to be. I wouldn't be surprised if she staged this whole thing just to make me look bad and make you leave me tonight." The phone line went dead silent for 3 long agonizing seconds. Then Adrian spoke, his voice colder and crueler than Nora had ever heard it, devoid of any love, mercy, or humanity. "Nora, you are completely beyond saving." He ended the call instantly. Seconds later, her phone screen lit up one final time. "Adrian Hayes sent you $100. The note was short, final, and soul-crushing. Emergency fee." Everything went black after that. When Nora finally woke up again, a thin of wine was stuck in the back of her hand, and the sharp burning smell of hospital disinfectant filled her nose. A nurse's gentle hand rested on her shoulder, her voice soft and sorrowful. "Nora, don't try to move, you just finished emergency surgery." The doctor walked into the room moments later, holding a thick medical chart, his face grave and somber. Nora's fingers tightened desperately around the crisp hospital sheets, her entire body trembling with one single, terrified question. "My baby, is my baby okay?" The doctor hesitated for a long painful second, his eyes filled with pity and grief. "I'm so sorry, Nora, we couldn't save your son." Those 7 words shattered her entire world. Everything around her felt distant and muffled, like she was drowning underwater. She could still feel her baby's tiny kicks that morning, still feel him moving safely inside her belly during her hospital checkup, still feel him shift gently when she'd signed the terrible reception sign. In sheet, he'd been there. He'd been alive. How could he be gone? The doctor continued gently, delivering the devastating medical details that broke Nora's heart completely. "You were rushed in with a severe placental abruption and catastrophic internal bleeding. We performed an emergency C-section immediately, and the entire NICU team worked tirelessly to resuscitate your baby, but he was deprived of oxygen for far too long during the emergency. His heartbeat never recovered." Nora opened her mouth to scream, to cry, to beg for a second chance, but no sound would come out. Hot silent tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. The nurse leaned in, her voice soft and broken, delivering one final painful detail. "It was a beautiful baby boy, Nora. She hadn't even gotten to name him. She hadn't even gotten to hold him. She hadn't even let Adrian listen to his tiny heartbeat once, to give him a chance to love their son before it was too late." A quiet knock sounded at the hospital door, and a registrar stepped inside with a tablet, her expression uneasy and guilty, clearly hating that she had to deliver more bad news in Nora's darkest moment. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry to disturb you. We need to confirm a guarantor for your remaining medical charges. Your emergency surgery and life-saving care have accrued outstanding fees, and we need to reach your husband to sort out payment." Through blurred vision and crippling heartbreak, Nora whispered two broken words: "Call him." The nurse picked up her phone and dialed Adrian's number again and again, but every single call went straight to voicemail. His phone was still completely turned off. He was still celebrating at his glamorous gala, oblivious to the nightmare that had just destroyed Nora's life and ended their son's. Nora wanted to scream at the nurse to keep calling, to make him answer, to tell him he'd killed his own child with his cruelty and suspicion. She wanted to beg him to finally come to her side, to hold her while she grieved their baby, but a brutal new wave of crippling pain hit her before she could speak. Warm blood flooded beneath her body, soaking through the hospital sheets in seconds. The heart monitor beside her began blaring shrill, terrifying alarms: postpartum hemorrhage. The nurse shouted in alarm, slamming her hand on the emergency call button. The hospital room flooded with medical staff in an instant. Hands pulled back the blood-soaked sheets. A crash cart screeched into the room. Voices shouted out her plummeting blood pressure and critical blood loss levels. The doctor leaned over her, shouting her name, begging her not to close her eyes, not to give up. But Nora could barely hear her. All the sounds faded away, muffled and distant. As hospital ceiling lights blurred past her fading vision, she thought back to the young, loving Adrian who'd once sworn to stand beside her through every hard thing life could throw at them. He'd promised to protect her, to love her, to never leave her alone, but on the hardest, most devastating night of her entire life, he was nowhere to be found. His phone was dead, his heart was colder than ice. The last sound Nora heard before everything went completely dark was the doctor's desperate, terrified voice. "She's losing blood too fast, we're losing her." Back at the military charity gala, the night was still glittering and perfect for Adrian and Madeline. The art museum lobby blazed with crystal chandelier light, and the auction host was wrapping up the night's formal program, thanking all the distinguished guests for attending. Madeline stood center stage, holding a prestigious charity award, surrounded by adoring officers' wives, smiling triumphantly like she'd already won Adrian and the perfect life she'd always wanted. Adrian finally powered on his dead phone after the event ended, ready to dismiss any petty messages from Nora. Dozens of missed calls and unread texts flooded his screen instantly, piling up one after another, urgent and desperate, before he could even click to read a single message. His panicked staff officer, Lieutenant Cole, came sprinting through the crowd, his face deathly pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Adrian's first reaction was pure irritation, annoyed at having his perfect night interrupted by what he assumed was another one of Nora's fake emergencies. "Take some cash to the hospital, and sort out whatever petty issue Nora's made up this time," he ordered sharply. "If it's another bill, handle it for me. I don't have time for her lies tonight." Lieutenant Cole froze in place, unable to move, his entire body trembling with dread. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking completely as he delivered the unthinkable news that would break Adrian's perfect, cruel world forever. "Major Hayes, the base hospital just contacted command. Major Hayes, your wife and your child are both dead." The cold, arrogant, unbreakable Major Adrian Hayes collapsed inward in that single second. All his pride, all his suspicion, all his hatred for the wife he'd spent years punishing shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The $100 payments, the cruel insults, the public humiliation, the nights he'd chosen Madeline over the woman who'd once loved him unconditionally, every terrible choice crashed over him like a tidal wave. He'd spent years convinced Nora was the greedy liar, but he was the one who'd destroyed his entire family with his own hands, and now, he had to live with that unbearable guilt for the rest of his life. "Now I need to hear from you. Do you think Adrian will ever be able to forgive himself for his cruel, fatal mistakes, or will Madeline continue to manipulate him, letting him never learn the full truth of what he's done?" Drop your honest thoughts down in the comments below. If you were devastated by this heartbreaking tragedy, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more gripping emotional stories, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Share this story with someone who loves raw, unfiltered emotional dramas. This is an ending no one sees coming.